sexpionage, broken toys, honey trap operations. It's going to be an episode in which I learn some new terms.
We're previewing To Die For on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee, and in this episode we'll introduce you to a podcast from Tenderfoot TV and iHeart podcasts called To Die For.
After that, we'll tackle a true crime question of the week.
If you haven't listened to the first episode of To Die For, that's great. This is one of our preview episodes where we will introduce you to the podcast. We only will discuss the first episode. No spoilers here of what's to come. There is also a link for To Die For is also in our show notes.
In our next episode, we'll discuss the whole series. But right now, we just want to decide if this is a crime that's worth your time. Dee, before we get to this,
Yes.
normally at this point in the show, we jump in the time machine and go back to the time where the crime happened. However, this show is about a series of crimes that don't take place at a specific time, or at least we don't hear about it in the first episode. And I listened to it twice and I went through the transcript trying to find the time. So instead of that,
What are we going to call it, Jeff?
we're going to jump in the spy machine.
Wow. What a clever name.
Thanks for the name, Dee. Do you want to describe what we're going to do with the spy machine?
So the spy machine is usually we look at a specific date and we discuss things that happened in or around that date in the year a crime took place. You just said that, really.
I did just say that. That's okay.
But instead of looking at the date that the crime took place, we're going to look at anything spy related. So we're jumping all over the board here. I've even brought an Irish story to the table. How exciting.
I can't wait. Do you want to go first?
Say it with more enthusiasm, plees.
I
can't
can't
wait.
wait.
Me, American, don't care about anything else.
Wow, is that how Americans sound?
Oh, God. Go on.
All right, do you want me to go first or you want to go first?
You can go first.
All right, so what I have is from a website called historyhit.com. Never heard of it. But these are some of the coolest spy gadgets that really exist and have been used in real spying stuff. So I want to talk about 3 of them that I thought were the coolest of the 10. The first one, I'd actually heard about this before, which is poison-tipped umbrellas. Have you heard of poison-tipped umbrellas?
Yes. I feel like I'm going to say this a lot in this episode and maybe in the next episode. Have I seen them in James Bond before?
I don't know, but I know this podcast is about Russian spies. And so this is something that Soviet spies, Russian spies, have definitely used. So it's where they put a bit of ricin or some other type of poison, slow-acting poison, in the tip of an umbrella. So there's one example that this article mentioned was from 1978 when Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov was walking across a bridge in London, and he felt a little twinge in his leg as a guy walked past him, and then 4 days later, he died. Turns out there was a tiny little metal pellet lodged in his leg, and they never found the guy who did it. So that's definitely a way that people have been killed by spies before.
Whoa.
Yeah. Then, something a little bit different. Have you ever heard... Actually, let me ask it this way. If you wanted to get a picture of something before the era of drones, but you wanted to get kind of an aerial shot that didn't send a plane or like a helicopter over it, how do you think you might do that?
I don't know. A balloon?
What if you could put a camera on a pigeon?
Ooh.
Yeah. In World War I and World War II, I don't know which side it was. This article doesn't actually say, but one of the sides would strap these cameras to pigeons and have the pigeons fly over battlefields to get an idea of what kind of soldiers were there, what kind of supplies were there. And I've seen a picture of a pigeon with the camera on it, and they look ridiculous. And then my last one.
I mean, the same as like drones look ridiculous.
This looks somehow more ridiculous. You should Google pigeon with a camera on it from World War One. All right, my last one is a tie-in to this show. So this show is about sexpionage, and related, if you were going to put a gun
Oh, God.
inside any makeup item,
Oh, okay.
what do you think would be the best one to conceal a gun?
Oh, that's way better than what I thought you were going to ask. I mean, it depends how small the gun can be.
You're giving this like serious thought.
Presumably lipstick is like the most used thing. So I presume it's lipstick.
It is lipstick.
That's really small.
Well, okay. So in 1965,
Oh, might have been bigger.
in West Berlin, American officials arrested someone they thought was suspicious. They checked her lipstick, and turns out her lipstick case had a 4.5 millimeter pistol that could fire a single .177 caliber round. They called it the Kiss of Death. Yeah.
That's good.
And it's you can see it in the International Spy Museum, which is in Washington, D.C.
This big?
It's real tiny. Yeah, there's a picture of it here, but there's nothing to help see the scale of it. It looks like a normal lipstick container. What do you call a lipstick thing? A thing that has lipstick in it. Tube?
That was really interesting. I enjoyed the lipstick one. That was my favorite. Okay, Jeff, my story is wild. So there's this house in Dublin, in the suburb I grew up in. I walk by this house every day on my way to secondary school. It was always known as the Nazi house. And we always presumed that was, rumor. There was no real truth behind it.
Okay.
People from the road would have always said it was built in the shape of a swastika.
Like the house was built in the shape of a swastika.
Yeah. Now that we have whenever we got Google Maps and aerial footage, we realized it wasn't really in the house of the shape of a swastika, but from the front it looked like it was an interesting angles. So it turns out that it absolutely is not in the shape of a swastika. That's why we assumed it was called a Nazi house. We were like, oh, it's in the shape of a swastika. But actually the story is so much more mental than that. It's crazy. Okay. In 1940, the owner of the house was Stephen Carroll Held. That was his name.
Okay.
And in 1940, the house was raided by the police, and the owner was arrested after a used parachute, German military clothing, medals, a wireless transmitter, £20,000 in cash, and documents relating to espionage were found in a spare room. Stephen Carroll Held blamed a lodger.
A lodger who presumably parachuted in.
He said he had rented out the room. There was a lodger living there, and he knew nothing about the contents of the room.
Do you usually parachute into your hotel rooms or?
I parachute in everywhere. You got to make an entrance,
Sure.
So anyway, the police thought he was making this up, obviously.
Sure.
It turned out that the lodger was not made up. A few weeks prior to the raid, an SS agent called Herman Goertz had landed in County Meath. You remember Meath from our very first story on So Much Crime, So Little Time.
Yeah.
He walked to Dublin. That's a long walk.
How far is that?
They're bordering counties. Oh,
Okay.
Don't ask me this. I haven't looked up the length.
I remember it being a pretty long ways
Meath
to Dublin.
Dublin.
Because I remember that Una Linsky used to take the bus, and at the time we looked it up and we're like, oh, this is pretty rural because it's farm country.
I've chosen a random place in Meath here. Meath to Dublin, where this house was, it would take 10 hours and 39 minutes to walk, but it could have been somewhere else in Meath. So
you said 10 hours by foot, walking.
Yeah.
That's pretty far. Okay.
Yeah. He landed in County Meath, walked to Dublin in a Luftwaffe uniform. Did I say that right? I don't even know.
Sure.
even stopped at a Garda barracks. Reminder, Gardaí or the Garda are the police. It's the Irish word for police in Irish. Irish word for police in Irish. It's the word for police in Irish.
Say it again.
Garda.
It's a word that just, it's like I'm blind to that word. I have no.
He even stopped in a Garda barracks to ask for directions in his uniform.
Wait, what year is this? 1940?
1940.
Okay, so like the war, where's the war at that point? It's on, right?
It's on, but it's like
early days.
Early days.
Okay.
So basically, it turns out he was working with the IRA to gain access to Britain through Northern Ireland, because the IRA were fighting a cause, fighting against Britain. Presumably, all they knew about Germany was they could give them weapons.
Wait, Northern Ireland is fighting England.
The IRA is fighting Britain to take back Northern Ireland.
And I apologize for my lack of Irish geography knowledge, but Dublin is
in the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, not Northern Ireland.
Mm-mm.
Those are different places.
Yeah, actually, technically different countries. The Republic of Ireland is its own state independent country. 6 counties of Northern Ireland still belong to the United Kingdom.
Wait, did the IRA align with the Nazis?
It appears from this they did. I suppose we have to remember that in 1940, the knowledge of what actually was happening in Germany through media might not have been as obviously as clear as people started to know. I know.
Oh, sure. Lots of Americans sided with the Nazis early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and we are at early stages here. The IRA at that stage, presumably just what they wanted was arms. They wanted arms. They wanted weapons. And that's their sole focus.
Some still do. But
so basically, he's caught and then eventually arrested. Goertz is. Okay?
Okay.
He was 6 years later, in 1946, he was released from prison. He starts life in South Dublin.
As one does.
He became secretary of a charity called the German Children Fund. So he's setting up a life for himself here. A year later, he was brought into what was then known as the Aliens Office in Dublin and given a deportation notice. So in 1947, he's brought in and they're told, look, we released you, but we don't want you in our country.
Sure.
Okay. He responds to this by removing his pipe from his mouth and placing a vial into his mouth.
Oh.
And ultimately died of poison a few days later.
Like a cyanide thing?
Mm-hmm.
But
He obviously had it ready to go whenever he was going to be caught and sent back. He had it ready to pop in and he was like, this is my out.
That's a crazy story.
I know.
I have so many questions.
I give you 2 questions.
2 questions. Okay, I have to use them wisely.
Or more, and we can put them up on Patreon, but we have a lot of work to do.
All right, first one. Is Ireland, or Dublin maybe specifically, so charming that even a Nazi who's been in prison for 6 years is like, this is the place for me?
I'm not sure, but I'd imagine a Nazi who's been arrested, put in prison. The war is then over by the time he is released from prison. Okay. He's not going to want to go back to Germany.
Sure. And Germany in 1946, not at its best.
Where else would he go? Presumably the only passport, if he has any documents, are German.
Okay. And wait, and you said at the beginning of this that in 1940, he was a lodger in this Nazi house that you, as a younger person, knew as the Nazi house. And that all stems back to when he was staying there before he got arrested.
Yeah. So the rumor mill in this case was actually, like, there was a legitimacy behind it.
So that like label on that house hung around for at least the 5 to 10 years from 1940 to when you were a child. And
You're so funny.
all right. I
It's
think I've
like
used all my questions.
7 decades later. Yeah, isn't that so crazy though?
That's a crazy story.
I know.
I like that.
Okay,
Is that our spy machine for today?
that's it.
All right, Dee, let's talk about what To Die For is about. So this is a podcast that came out in March 2024. Quick side note, this is an unusual podcast where it's 8 episodes and they all dropped on, I think, the same day, which I feel like is odd. Anyway, they're each about 30 minutes long. The host is this guy, Neil Strauss. Have you heard of Neil Strauss before?
I had not.
Okay, I have. So some fun facts about Neil Strauss. He has written for a bunch of places. He wrote for Rolling Stone, New York Times. I've come across him. I think he was writing for Rolling Stone a lot when I was reading Rolling Stone in the, let's call it the 90s and early 2000s. I think he's done
When
some
I was
big
learning to read.
Okay. But like I think he's had big pieces on like Kurt Cobain and like popular music and things in culture in the 90s and early 2000s. He also wrote a book. He's probably most known for a book he wrote called The Game, subtitles Penetrating the Secret Society of Pickup Artists. So this was about, he basically chronicled his journey into the, quote, seduction community, where he went by the name Style. And but then he's also co-written or ghost-written a bunch of books with celebrities. So like everybody from Kevin Hart to Marilyn Manson to Motley Crue to Jenna Jameson. And yeah, so he's been around for a long time writing. He's had a couple other podcasts. And yeah, he's a fairly well-known, I think, journalist, writer, host guy.
That's the second time Kevin Hart has come up in a conversation with someone today, which is kind of a funny aside. So what's the story we're dealing with here? We get introduced to Aliia.
Yeah, Aliia
Roza, who's an alleged former Russian sex spy, who Neil Strauss is introduced to, and it just goes from there. I don't want to say too much before we dive in. Do you want to go refill your glass?
No, it's fine. I'll have plenty tomorrow.
All righty, Jeff. Okay. Initial thoughts? Will we start with the intro?
Yeah. You want to start with the intro?
Yeah.
So
what did you
the
make
intro
of?
being like before the credits, the opening is Aliia Roza, where she's talking about how every woman can seduce a man, like possesses the ability to seduce a man. And then we kind of get introduced to this idea of sexpionage as a thing.
I think one of the definitions was her body was made into a weapon by Russian military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do you think of the opening?
The opening for me felt very Netflixy, like very like this woman with this like Russian accent, potential Russian accent to that point because we don't know, like speaking about like in this kind of very calm but very deliberate manner about how to seduce a man. And then we've got this theme tune that is very James Bondy, very I don't know, if when I first listened I was like, to that first bit I was just like, this sounds a little bit too fake, I suppose. Like when I'm looking at Netflix, this is what I'm expecting if it's a Netflix made documentary.
Yeah, it's a little glossy, a little maybe overly slick, overly produced.
But when you're dealing with slick and you're dealing with this subject matter, I feel like it's like we're borderline sleazy as opposed to slick.
Well, and then it kind of leans hard into that as we go, right? Because so we said in the teaser about the mafia. What did we say? We said the mafia, the CIA and the KGB walk into a bar. And so that's kind of the setup of how Neil Strauss meets Aliia by way of this like son of this mob guy, which
the son of the Beverly Hills gangster.
Yeah. So there's like Johnny and Johnny Jr. This is Johnny Jr. And this guy is a little bit crude, a little bit crass.
A little bit. So Johnny Jr. like calls up Neil Strauss apparently and was like, "Oh, we haven't been speaking in ages. I've got this really good story for you." I don't know why he's speaking like that. Whatever accent I'm
Not really
using.
how he talks.
It's not at all how he talks. I'm sorry, Johnny Jr. Like blah blah blah. Like this great story. Do you think he's believable?
No.
He
No.
feels like so unbelievable. He's really, really crass. And he starts talking about, oh, there's this girl I met and she worked as a sex spy for the Russians and she went to school to like, I don't even want to repeat the things he said that she did in school. Like, I feel like it's not necessary for our podcast, but he goes into like very specific details of like things she learned how to do and what she had to do in front of her teacher and the rest of the class and all this kind of stuff. It's just, it's very crass and it really undermines his credibility. But I do think, to be fair to Neil Strauss, he does say that.
Yeah, he does. He calls it out as, I think he uses the word crass, but he also chooses to lead this. I don't know if it was his choice or the producer's choice, but he chooses to open the podcast with this guy who, I don't know, maybe we'll find out later, but it doesn't seem like, other than introducing Aliia to Neil, is important to the story in any meaningful way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear that. I don't know whether it's just a case of like gangster or former gangster's son introduces me to this mad story. Like it's just kind of an additional dramatic element. I'm not sure. It feels like a dramatic story enough without it, but as you said, we'll see how that plays out.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I feel like Russian sex spy wants to tell her story. Like that's enough. Is it not enough?
I feel like it's enough, but anyway, maybe not. So just as we're talking about the host, what's your feeling?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think I've read his stuff before, and I feel like his name was definitely familiar to me. I've not read any of his books, but I feel like I've read his articles over the years, and it's just like I think he writes kind of pop culture-y things. Like I think the types of people that he ghost wrote books for is maybe indicative of the type of host he comes off as, right? Like the type of person who would ghost write a book for Jenna Jameson and Motley Crue is a guy who maybe like lives in a certain space of sort of tawdry, salacious, like that. And also his book about becoming like the art of seduction or whatever. Like he comes across a little bit like that. Like here he's sort of playing the straight man, right? Like he's the journalist who's interviewing this woman who is the mystery, right? Like she's the spy. But I feel like it's hard not to separate him from that background.
I'm intrigued to see, you're so right there, but he also brings in, and again, we don't know how much it's him versus like the other producers or editors of the show, but he also brings in how, the FBI used my book, and I had to teach a class to the FBI and all this kind of stuff, which I was like, okay, it definitely like makes him more believable because he's got that whole connection maybe, and they do have someone talk.
I feel like it comes across as trying too hard. Like, did he need to tell us that his reason that he has a connection with the FBI is because the FBI thinks that his book is the end all be all of how to train field agents? Like, I didn't need that.
No. Well, okay. So what I was trying to say, maybe I wasn't saying it clear enough, was like, I kind of found that a bit annoying. I was like, where are we going with this? Oh, we're jumping back into the actual story, not necessary. But was that more to be like, hey, I've written this salacious book. I have this reputation for co-writing books about like people in pop culture, blah, 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 Jenna Jameson, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. But I just want you to know from the offset, like I am believable. Like even the FBI want to work with me. So I'm a credible person. Like, I'm not just that guy. I am in fact seen in kind of a stronger light by some people. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. That's not the way it came off to me. And maybe this is my own projecting onto him. And I think I have one other example of where, like, so if we're talking about like my initial take on the host, it wasn't super positive. The other thing that happened, this is a little bit later in the episode.
I think
What?
I'm going to have this written down as well. Go on.
All right. So there's a moment where he brings Aliia to his home to interview her, and he gives her a bottle of wine, and then he goes to check on his son. And I have a question that I want to come back to there. And then he says, I get the funny feeling that she's trying to prove to me that she hasn't tampered with the wine. So she doesn't open the wine until he comes back. And then we hear a clip of them talking. So the narration is him saying, I get the funny feeling that she hasn't tampered with the wine. She wants to prove to me she hasn't tampered with the wine. And then we get a clip of him asking her and her saying, yeah, well, I didn't want to like think that I could have put something in the wine. And it's almost like his own insecurity coming out of, I'm going to narrate what I think happened. And I'm going to play you a clip of me showing that I thought this, and then her confirming that what I thought was true, just so you know that I am seeing through what she's doing and I am that clever. It just, I don't know. It sounded insecure and a little bit needy.
That's what you took out of that clip? You didn't take, why the hell is he asking her to go to his house while he puts his son to bed around Thanksgiving to share a bottle of wine? He's like, it's not often I share a bottle of wine with my interviewees. I'm like, yeah, but like when we're talking about a sex spy, you do. That was creepy and it was weird. I didn't know why we were even being told that. I'm like, so are you...
So you're right. There's a lot of things that kind of get glossed over in the story. Actually, the thing that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you about was, why is he bringing this woman who is apparently a Russian spy, who he's not sure is not still a Russian spy, to his home where his child is? Like, wouldn't he want a little bit of like professional
distance? Do you want
me
to give you the answer that is in my head?
Wow, that hadn't occurred to me until you said it.
The answer that's in my head. Like, I think we can fill in the blanks ourselves as to why that is. But I was just like, I think... So originally I was saying I felt like the FBI story kind of solidifies and makes them more believable. And then you have this. I'm like, well, you're taking your credibility totally out there. I don't want to come across, and he didn't say that, but like in a way, if the FBI story is to make him seem less like I'm not just a salacious journalist, blah, 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 but also first episode, I'm going to bring her back to my house and share a bottle of wine with her. Like, maybe don't do that. Not for your safety. I'm not worried about your safety. I'm like, well, what's the believability of the rest of the story then? Like, if you're like, oh, she is such an honest person, I'm like, honest or like a good lay? Like, I don't know. Like, does it completely impact his like neutrality with the rest of the story? Can he be an honest host given that as the background?
Yeah.
No?
I don't know. I have my doubts.
Yeah, so do I. I don't think I knew how many doubts I had until we started speaking about it. Yeah, as you said, we'll see how that goes. When we're talking about believability, the other thing I suppose I wanted to talk about is Aliia's believability.
Yeah, what do you think here? I actually wrote that down. Like, do you think she's legit?
It's really hard to know because in one way, at the start when she was like, I'm so happy to meet you, I'm so happy to be here. Why would you be happy? Like, you're putting yourself in danger by speaking out if this is in fact true.
Yeah.
You have a 13-year-old boy, which is a son, which is what you've said. She's not scared maybe of who might hear this, but she's also like, there's so many people around. If you ever mention Putin, like, you know, there's always people listening.
Right. Because, I mean, he's still in charge of Russia and this kind of stuff is still going on and people are still getting murdered for speaking out against him. And if she really was a spy and if she's really not still a spy, then like, isn't like, I don't know. I looked her up to see, actually I was looking up to try to figure out how to spell her name because her name is spelled oddly. It's Aliia, which is not a spelling of Aliia that I was familiar with. I thought it was like the singer Aliia. It's not. Anyway, so there's a giant poster of her in like, I don't know, it's like Times Square or something that she posted on Instagram, basically like advertising this podcast. And so she's not being shy about it, right? Like she's putting herself out there.
I don't know. Because, like, part of me was like, respect to her speaking out. And she said, like, the reason she spoke out was 2 reasons she gave. It was, like, at the start of the Ukrainian war. That was really a catalyst for her to start speaking out. But then also she said she wanted her son to know that, you know, she had courage and bravery to stand up against evil. But she also spoke about Putin in kind of like a positive light. I don't know whether that's the whole, like, a kind of a cult-esque mindset of, I've been trained to believe that he is so good. But she was like, well, he just wants what all of us want and blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
She also said that women in Russia have the same rights as a dog.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it was a little all over the place. And I think the other thing that she said about Putin was that she compared the host, Neil, to Putin. She says, you two are a lot alike, which also a weird statement, right? Weird thing to leave in.
Like, weird thing to leave in.
What do you think here?
I just have so many thoughts. I feel like there's a lot of... It's mentioned here how male dominance in Russia is so strong. That's one thing Aliia mentions. And as you said, it also is mentioned how women are basically have the same rights as dogs. And I just feel like in the last number of years, it's been it's been incredibly upsetting and disgusting to see certain figures around the world to be put on a pedestal who are basically speaking about women in this way as objects, as, you know, just not having the same, like, not being equal to men, and it's seeping into teenagers and to teenage boys' kind of psyche and into their social media and all of this. There's so many people around. There's a couple I wouldn't even give them I wouldn't even name them because that's but it's kind of disgusting. And yeah, you're so right, not something thought of. The fact that he left in that she compared him to Putin again, I don't know. I don't think I like him.
Let me ask you this. So let's step back from this for a second. There's not a whole lot more, I think, in this episode to cover. There's a couple other things that I wanted to bring up, but one thing I wanted to ask you was, so this was a podcast that you chose for us to listen to. I'm curious what, like, as you think about what's kind of to come and what more we're going to maybe get out of this, like, what about this story was appealing to you? Like, what are you hoping for? Where are you hoping it goes?
So one of the reasons I wanted to go into it was I started to, like, grab, as both of us do, like, just grabbing kind of different types of stories. One thing we like to do here is get stories from around the world, like areas we haven't touched yet. We haven't gone to Russia yet.
Sure.
Let's grab that. Let's see what's going on. And this is such a different type of crime than we have dealt with entirely. So I felt like it just could be an interesting one to discuss.
Yeah.
Having listened to the first episode, what annoys me is I'm here for it. I really want to listen to the next one. And I'm frustrated by that because I'm frustrated that I'm enjoying it. It feels like the music and the calm voices and the entire setup is created to seduce the listeners. And back it. I want to listen to more. It's working. And that's kind of frustrating in one way.
Is it like a, I say this having never watched it, but like a Bridgerton or like 50 Shades of Grey kind of like.
I've never watched 50 Shades of Grey, but Bridgerton, yeah, but like also Bridgerton's great.
Oh, I thought it was bad. Is it not bad? It's good?
I mean, objectively great, I think.
Okay. But you know, the type of thing I'm talking about where it's like, it's you know watching it, it's bad, but you still just kind of want to keep, or Fast and the Furious. Also never seen a Fast and the Furious movie,
okay.
But I presume
Bridgerton doesn't fall into like, it's actually bad. Like, it's really good.
Okay. I don't know.
It's like, It's like Vanderpump Rules or like A Real Housewives.
You
Where
keep
it's-
saying names of things that I have not watched.
Yeah, cool. This is like what happens when you talk about things that happened when you grew up and I was not born yet. We
It's a false equivalency, I think.
So it's like, yeah.
You want to keep listening, though. You want to keep. You want to see where this goes.
I want to see where this goes, but I will say I'm going in with a little bit of trepidation, saying, "Is this going to be cack? Like, is it going to be? Do you know that word, cack?
Yeah, yeah.
The Irish word for shit.
That's a funny word. It's a good word.
Like, is it just going to be like?
Yeah.
I don't know. I also, again, like, I don't know how much substance there actually is here. There's a lot of chat.
That's what I'm worried about. I feel like a lot of this episode, and I think we've seen this in a lot of episodes, a lot of first episodes, where the first episode is a version of a trailer, a tease, let's set things up, but it's a lot of exposition or it's a lot of setup without a lot of resolution. And this is, I feel like, all tease. No, there's not a lot of substance.
Isn't that what she said in the intro, though?
Yeah, it is. Exactly
she literally was saying, you know, you don't give it all up on the first date. You tease them a bit, and that's how you get these honey traps or whatever. So like it is playing to the theme. So maybe we're being harsh. Maybe we're going to have to apologize to Neil Strauss when we end up loving this and thinking that it was a genius intro and first episode.
Maybe. I guess we'll find out.
I guess we'll find out. Before we jump into the true crime question of the week, we just wanted to take a moment to remind you that we are now on Patreon, patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. You can find the link in our show notes or on our website, so much crime, so little time.com.
And also, we wanted to remind you to please take a moment, if you haven't yet, and rate us on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. We also really appreciate it. It helps more people find the show, which is great. So thank you for doing that. All right, Dee. You ready for our true crime question of the week?
So ready, yeah.
So this show is all about spies, and of course, I often think about how I would do in the world as a spy. I'm sure you do as well.
Absolutely.
So what do you think, if you were to be recruited to be a spy, what would be your best and your worst natural spy skills?
I have a funny story kind of related to this, but I do. I think my observation skills would be my best spy skills.
What do you mean by that?
I'm a good read of a person and of people, I think. And I think I'd be able to, look out for tells for other spies or other agents. I think that would be my best one. I'm a good read of I have a good read of people, I think.
Okay. Do we want to do our best first and then our worst?
I don't know my worst. I mean, how long do you have? If give me an extra tequila and I'll just tell you everything that I know about everything. And I think with spies, you're supposed to not do that. I don't even think I need the tequila. I love a chat. And we've said this before. Like, if I get into a good conversation, I trust someone. Yeah, like I lay all my thoughts and feelings on the table. It's just how I'm built. I don't think that's supposed to be how a spy is built.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about like Daniel Craig as James Bond or like Matt Damon as Bourne or like Tom Cruise in those Mission Impossible movies, I think they're all known for they just never stop talking, right?
Yeah.
Like they just open up about everything they've seen and everything they think. Yeah.
What about you?
I think in terms of best, I feel like I actually am pretty decent at, and this gets back to some of our past Time Machine episodes where we do the like flat reading of poems. Like I think I'm good at sort of disguising emotion and doing this flat reading and not letting like my emotions show.
Your face is good at covering your emotions too, unless you're caught off guard, I think.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know.
Why
I don't
did
know
you
my face
do a
look.
pause there? You
I
know,
don't
like
know.
some people's faces give them, like one of my friends, like, we're always slagging her about her face because her face just does all these mad emotions.
So I think I use that as like for deadpan humor, which is maybe not a spy skill, but I think is a relatable skill. On the flip side, I think, like, I was just thinking about like spy movies because that's probably what I know the best. And there's a lot of times where I'm watching like a James Bond movie or like a Mission Impossible movie, and I think like, yeah, I just wouldn't do that. Like if I had to go like out on the edge of that building like Tom Cruise does, or hanging onto the side of that airplane, or most of the things that James Bond does, like I just
So
like
just
nah.
all the physical stuff. Like I'm not going to jump from here to there. No, thank you.
Yeah, nah, I just wouldn't do it. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like if you were in that situation, you'd get all uber competitive and be like, oh, you have to do it.
I wouldn't hang on the outside of a plane. Would you do the hanging on the outside of the plane thing?
Are you joking? I can barely hang onto the rail when I'm going down the stairs at work. It scares the crap out of me. It's so steep. But like I've literally had to pause sometimes and like reorganize what I'm holding and ask people to hold stuff for me because I have to be holding onto the rail because I'm a granny. But yeah.
So you're definitely not like climbing up the side of the world's tallest skyscraper, and
No,
yeah,
barely
no,
climbing up the stairs.
I just wouldn't. I wouldn't do that.
I will say, random tidbit. Years ago, maybe 2004, 2005, I was in Spain with a friend and her family, and there was like a hypnotist, and I was called up to be hypnotized. Apparently, I was like in the lobby of a hotel. I was hypnotized. And one of the things you had to do was like go back to your seat and everything was normal. But as soon as they clicked their fingers, they would, you had to like jump out of your seat and roll across the room as if you were a spy.
Wait, you did that?
I did that. Yeah. Very funny.
All right,
Power
so you
of
could
the mind.
you could be hypnotized into being a spy.
Like obviously, yeah, totally. Or like,
All right. That is our true crime question of the week. Next time, we'll recap all of To Die For.
Is Aliia who she says she is? Is Neil who he says he is? Are we all just doing tongue twisters? Are we all spies? What is a spy, really?
We'll answer some of those questions, or maybe none of those questions.
That's on the next So Much Crime.
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.